Welcome to the Phoenix podcast hosted by Marta Miner with guests who have walked through fire and emerged stronger than ever. Let their stories light up your way. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the show. Today, I have such an unusual guest and somebody who will definitely blow your mind with his story and such an example of resilience, perseverance, and just testament to what a human being can go through and come out on the other end in a beautiful place and create love and life full of joy and happiness and be able to help other people. So today we're going to be speaking with Richie Acosta, who is somebody that I met recently at one of my networking events. And it was very unusual how we met because he did approach me through a Facebook group and mentioned like, hey, I want to know more about your podcast. And then when he saw me, you can tell your story, Richie, how you felt, but he felt like he needed to connect with me. And there's some kind of energy that he felt that we needed to bring him on the podcast and share his story. So I wanted to introduce you to the podcast and tell me a little bit more, like, why did you even want to speak with me?
Thank you. Thank you, Marta, for that introduction. And first, before we even jump into it, I just want to say what an honor it is for me to be able to be on this stage with you on your show. Super grateful to be here and super grateful to just share the next
Thank
couple of
you.
minutes, hours, whatever it may be here with you. So yeah, let's get into it. So we met in Atlanta, right? And I think it was the night before the actual trip when I was leaving on my plane. I was like, okay, let me get into a Facebook group. I haven't done that yet. Let me make a video, all that. And then I start seeing people's video. I start commenting and I see that you made an introduction and you had this podcast called Ashes to Love. And I'm like, oh wow. It just resonated with me so
Mhm.
much when I saw that Ashes to Love. I'm like, I want to meet this woman. I need to meet her. I want to talk to her. I got something I want to tell her.
Mhm.
And I went to that event with my cousin, Rigo. And I remember day one, we're at the event, whatnot. And I'm like, hey, have you seen this lady, Marta? Have you seen her? And he's like, no. And I go back to the Facebook to look at your picture and be like, what does she look
Mhm.
like? I forgot already.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, like day two, we're coming out of on a break or whatever. And I see you there in a line. And I'm like, and my cousin, hey, that's her. And I'm like, oh, I got to walk up to this lady and introduce myself and speak to her. And then just like from the moment that I went up to you, I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't know how to explain it, but your energy and then my energy, it just matched right there. And I think you were a little distracted. You had a friend that was, you girls were like on the way to do something. And I dropped one bomb on you and I just saw your facial expression just change. And you're
Yes.
like, and it was like, hold on, I got to listen to this.
Yeah.
And here we are today. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
pretty
no,
cool.
for sure. I love it because you may say the same story to somebody else and it doesn't resonate the same way. But when people are on the same vibe, that's what I'm searching. I'm searching proof. And you have that proof. So our energies align because this podcast is all about overcoming challenges and proving to people that it doesn't matter how bad it gets, it can get way better. Even when you feel like this is it, my life is over, there's no coming back from this. That's not true. And then you show up and you gave me like 20 examples of that. We're going to get into your story. But I'm like, if he can make it, like literally after talking to you, I came home and I thought, you know what? There is no excuse. There really is no excuse for anybody to complain about anything that they can't change their life because you've gone through it multiple times, very traumatic experiences, and you're still sitting here happy and creating beautiful things in your life. So, that was definitely something that I was very intrigued. And when I Richie followed up with me after the event and he's so, are we going to do the podcast? I'm like, listen, this is material for a blockbuster movie. This is not a podcast material. Yes, we're going to do the podcast. But right now, if anybody is a Hollywood producer, please get in touch with me because I am determined to turn this story into a blockbuster movie. And who do you want to play you? Tom Cruise or going to be the lead role?
I, I would love Tom Cruise. That would be such an honor.
I think so. I see that. That's in my head. I see Tom Cruise playing you in this crazy movie that is your life.
Oh,
So
that would be amazing. So I'm just pivoting from this, and since you just threw Tom Cruise out there, I'm gonna share a quick funny story. So me and my cousin Rigo, the one that was at the event with me
yeah.
when we were little kids, I'm talking about I don't know, maybe 8, 9 years old. We used to. He lived with me in Venezuela in South America, Caracas. That's where I grew up, and I had twin beds. And we would pretend that we were Top Gun, and I was a MacGyver, and he was Goose, and we would play flying these airplanes. So I pretended to be Tom Cruise all the time in Top Gun. So that would be a pretty
See?
cool story.
And I felt it. I felt it because I was thinking other actors. I'm like, no, for some reason Tom Cruise is coming to me. And that's another way of how we're aligned. Like you already envisioned Tom Cruise and being Tom Cruise. I'm like, no, Tom Cruise is gonna be you.
That would be so cool.
That would be cool. Hey, I'm not gonna give up on this dream. If somebody knows anybody who needs, hey, they're not making really good Hollywood movies these days. I'm like, what is happening? We need some really good script, and here we go. We're gonna provide you with a script, but please get in touch with us because I'm gonna be your agent.
I
And
love it. I love it.
so we're making fun and we're laughing here, but it's gonna get pretty dark and pretty deep. So just prepare yourself because certain things, when I heard you explain your story, really touched me and really, I don't know, it made me extremely sad and just a lot of emotions, right? So we're gonna be talking about certain things that happen in your life that really can impact people. So just be prepared that as much as we're laughing and saying, oh, this will be a fun movie, it's somebody's life that actually he lived through it. And he's a testament to what's possible, what you can actually overcome. So what I would love to start with is like when we shared, you gave me the entire story from the beginning when you were a little boy, your family moved here. Just tell me a little bit about your parents, like where they moved from. I know they're immigrants. So get us started on like your beginning.
Yeah, of course. So I was born in Miami, Florida, 82. My parents migrated from Cuba to Miami. I want to say it was in the 60s, late 60s, I think. Maybe I'm making that up. I'm not 100% sure, but yes, around that time. So I'm trying to just picture everybody could picture eras.
Mhm.
They were both immigrant. My mother comes from a prominent, well-to-do family. I would say upper middle class. Like if you could think of any type of department store here in the US, my grandfather had on my mom's side, him and his family, his brothers, they had on the island, I want to say 5, 6, 7 of these department stores throughout the island. And that was their family business, right? Before the communist Castro regime took over. So that's my mom's side of the family. My father's side of the family comes from the poorest part of Cuba, of La Habana. And
Mhm.
yeah, he comes from extreme poverty, right? He was the youngest of 6 siblings. And at a very early age, I make up the belief that he made a commitment to himself that he was gonna get out of poverty no matter what.
Mhm.
And that's what leads to the choices and decisions that he made in his life. So my parents meet. My mother originally first migrated to California. When she comes to the US, I want to say 12, 13, around that age. My father around the same age. He migrated to Florida and they ended up meeting, I want to say 16, 15, around that age. She was on a vacation, summer vacation, visiting family. They met and it was like love at first sight and they stayed together. My mother finished high school down here in Miami. She told her mother at the time, like, hey, I'm staying in Florida. I met this man. I'm in love. And
Mhm.
that's her story. Then I come to be born. My sister, I have an older sister. She was actually born before me, a couple of years before me. And then I come to life. And when I come to
Mhm.
life, it's early 80s, Miami. If you could think what the US was at that time, what South Florida was at that time. I don't know how many people have seen Cocaine Cowboys, but if you go to that type of Netflix or something like that, was Miami, right? Like the Miami was going
Mhm.
through, it was like this war on drugs, and it was going through this very difficult time. And I think if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to speak incorrectly here, but I believe that it was one of the dangerous cities at the time
Mhm.
in the United States. So it was pretty rough place to live in. It's not the
Mhm.
Miami that we live in today, the beautiful paradise where I call it mini Dubai today, right? There's so
Yeah.
much money and wealth everywhere, and it's such a
Mhm.
cool, vibrant city. That's not the Miami of the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
So that's the time I come to be born.
Yeah. And I ask about it because I always want to know people's motivation for what they do in their life. So before we get into the story and what happened, I want to paint a picture of who your father was. Like, what was his thought process whenever he made choices in life, right? So here is this man who comes from poverty, who meets a love of his life, and he starts a family, and she's accustomed to certain lifestyle coming from a family that's pretty wealthy. They're not maybe super multimillionaires, but she's comfortable, and he comes from
Right.
poverty, and we have kids and we need to support the family. So he may not know any different than what the path he chose. He just wanted to support his family, right? I don't know, but that's what the conclusion I come to. What is the motivation for somebody to do what he's done? So that's why I want to set up the story, so you can tell me from your perspective what you felt motivated your dad, and what is it that happened, because you did mention your childhood was not a typical childhood that a lot
Right.
of people can identify. Maybe it was typical in Miami at that time. I don't know, because like you said, it was different times, and families probably had situations like yours, maybe not to that extent, but it's nothing that most of us grew up with. So that's why it's such a fascinating story.
Yeah, I make up the same story you do, right, about my father. I make up the story that since he came from extreme poverty at a young age, I believe when he migrated from Cuba to this country, he made a choice and a decision that he was like he put money above everything else, right? Like
Hmm.
he was going to make money and not what most people think, okay, if I make a good living, 200K, 300K, 400K, what's a good living? 500K. It could be different for different people, right? No, I think for him, it was like I needed to make an abundance amount of money to not only take care of him and his family, but to take care of his entire family, like his brothers, his sisters, his mother. I think that's where what drove him to make choices that he made. And my father, he didn't go to high school. He dropped out of school. I believe it was in ninth grade. So like he never graduated high school. And I want to say early on when him and my mother first boyfriend and girlfriend, teenagers, I'm talking about 17 here, he was working at a butcher shop. That's what he was doing. And then you fast forward now, early 20s, you have your first kid, and I think that I make up the belief that the pressure of which we all have, right? As families, if you have families, when you have kids, you want to provide a certain type of life, put them in certain, give them certain
Yes.
education.
Hmm.
At least I do, right? Like I want to give the best to my kids, so I make up the belief that he was like, okay, I'm with this woman who's accustomed to a certain life, and now I have a child that I need to provide for. I can't be here. I got to
And I
give so
can't be a
much more.
butcher
And
doing that, right? Like, pay the bills. And
right,
coming from no education and no really legal path to be able to make that money. Back then, we didn't have social media where you can just be a TikTok star. There were different times,
yeah,
right? So you
complete
had
different
certain
time.
options that were available. I'm assuming. I always try to
Yeah,
get to people's brains, like, how do they choose what they're
yeah,
choosing? And it's not.
yeah.
There's reasons for it. So
Yeah,
what? Tell us a little
I
bit
think
what happened and.
I think that at that time, again, Miami, with the era that Miami was what was happening in Miami, I feel that for immigrants specifically,
Mhm.
Latin community, I felt like it was something that, hey, here's an easy path to make money. And that
Mhm.
opportunity presented to him very early on. And that's what he chose.
Mhm.
And he very quickly grew in that, where most people, I don't know, stay in a very small position, let's say. He grew to think of a corporation like Coca-Cola. Like
Wow. Mhm.
he grew to being in that world of
Yeah.
a Coca-Cola and being the CEO of Coca-Cola. So
Mm.
if you can
Yeah.
picture that. So yeah, I think that his choices and his motivation was always definitely driven by family and by wanting to provide not only for us, his children, his wife, but his extended family, his brothers and
Mhm.
sisters, his mother. I feel that he had this great desire and need to want to provide, and he made this choice that he was going to do it no matter what, and he did.
Yeah. And then when you get that kind of success, it's very hard to go backwards and become a butcher again. There are
Yeah,
no other
yeah,
options. Like once you're in it, and I don't know how much you want to reveal of like exactly he was doing something illegal, right? That was not,
yes, correct,
yes. And
yes,
and obviously something that paid a lot of money. And the reason I'm painting this picture is because you mentioned what happened to you one day when you were coming back from school. I don't remember if you were 6 or how old were you at that time,
yep.
where all of a sudden life changed drastically. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that. The first traumatic experience that I can remember in my childhood goes back to 3 years old.
3 years
And
old.
I don't have much memory of my 3 year old self, but this was so traumatic that I can never forget this. So 3 years old, you're in pre K three, right? My daughter's about to go
Mm-hmm.
there right now. So pre K three, imagine you're in your little school and you hear over the loudspeaker, Richard Acosta, Luani Acosta, please report to the principal's office. And I was like, what? Where's
Mm-hmm.
the principal's office? Where am I going? I remember walking outside of the classroom. My sister comes, grabs my hand, and we walk to the admissions office. And as soon as we walked in there, I see two police officers, and they tell me and my sister, hey, there's been an incident with your mom and dad. We need to take you guys to the police station. And that's all we got. So they take
Mm-hmm.
us into the police station, and it's super nice. I remember coloring. They gave me crayons, color book, and I felt, to me, it felt like forever. I have no idea how long I was actually at the police station, but, and I don't really remember seeing my sister in the picture. The only time I remember seeing her is when she got impatient of that it was like, okay, I want mom and dad, I want mom and dad, I want mom and dad. And
Mm-hmm.
finally they're like, okay, we could take you now to see your mother and father. And if you can picture this, we're driving, think of like just a straight street, right? Like a long road. And then on the right hand side of that road is all the houses. And as you entered that, the beginning of that road, there is lights everywhere, police cars everywhere, helicopters flying on top of my house, news cameras. It just think of like a scene of a movie, 50 cars, I don't know, something
Mm-hmm.
very, very chaotic, what seemed like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
noise, sirens going everywhere as a little kid driving through this and then getting to my house, going inside the gate. I remember looking to my left. I see we had a German Shepherd. I see my German Shepherd tied to the gate on a choker. And I see him foaming out of his mouth. And I say to the police officer, whoever was in my car, he's going to die. The dog, look at the dog. He's going to die. And for whatever reason, nobody paid attention to me. Nobody listened to me. Maybe I mumbled it under my breath. Who knows? I remember pulling into my driveway. As soon as they opened the door, my mother comes running to me. My sister hugs us, crying, kissing us, telling us everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And I look forward. My dad is sitting on our doorsteps in handcuffs. So that's the picture that I see at 3 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just listening to it, like it just automatically makes me want to cry because I'm seeing you now as a little boy experiencing something
Right.
like that, and you're so confused and you don't know. And our early memories is what forms our personality. It's like all these little things you may not even remember, but you know how it made you feel. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming it made you feel like there is no
Yeah.
safety, right?
Yeah. No
There's,
safety. Scared. So scared. I just felt so
mm-hmm,
scared. Right. Like
mm-hmm,
now that you mentioned, I'm thinking of my kids. Right. My son, my daughter. Oh my God. I can't. As a parent, that's something I would never want them to experience. Right.
yeah.
Yeah. The feeling was uh, chaotic. Was unsafe. Was
Yeah,
fear.
lack
You
of
know.
safety. And that's you
Right.
probably carry to some extent through your life. When we experience that really early on, you don't know any other life. From 3 year old, you just feel unsafe. And at any moment, something can pop and just like change and end or take people away from you. And why is that in handcuffs? And I can only imagine the impact, right? Because we don't have as much time, we can go into super in depth of every part of your story. But out of that, I know you guys ended up moving, right? So tell us a little bit
We
about
did.
that and at some point
Yeah.
how you came back.
So out of that, there what seemed like, I don't know, maybe a year of some chaotic moving. We go to Spain, we leave the country, we end up in Venezuela, and when we ended up in South America, to me it seemed like normal life. My mom and
Mhm.
dad, loving family, lots of positivity of love. That's who my parents were. They were givers to not just me and my sister, but to everybody around them. So that's really
Mhm.
what I saw growing up. I was in martial arts since I was three. So my father built my confidence and really built me up in martial arts. And it was always competing, traveling, but all
Mhm.
throughout South America. And at this time, life seems normal. Life seems okay. That trauma that I experienced at three was like somewhere in my subconscious mind, deep buried down in there. I had forgotten about it. Um, along along the years, sorry, I heard that my cousin Regal, his mother abandoned him when he was very young, 3 months old, I think, something like that. And I heard the story that the one that kidnapped my mother, because that event, that traumatic event that happened, what it was, somebody had kidnapped my mother from the grocery store, and then they go back to my house. My mother takes him back to the house, convinces him that, hey, there's money in my house, come. And they wake up my father with a gun in his head, and he convinces the people that, hey, there's money buried outside where the dogs are, and then he opens the cage, dog bites one of the perpetrators, and then from there, you know, neighbors call police, and that whole thing happens. So I hear that story for the first time. I think it was a cousin. Somebody tells me, and it was like, oh, it's Regal's mom. She was a crackhead, a drug addict, whatnot, and she's the one that had sent these people to
Oh,
go
wow.
and kidnap your mother. At that moment, I remember that first time that I heard that story, I was like, the anger, the resentment, these feelings of wanting to hurt someone else. For the first time, I started feeling these type of emotions, and I didn't even know who this lady was. I didn't even know the story was true. I had no idea, right? But it's something that I carried through me without the
Mm.
years until I began to practice forgiveness and go to therapy and all that, which that's way later down the road.
Yeah, that's a crucial part of the story is as a young boy, you find out your mom was kidnapped. I can't even imagine emotions that you go through. So you were already feeling unsafe when that craziness happened in front of the house, but you didn't know what happened. And
Right,
then you find out there is real danger in the world. And my mom was actually taken away. It could have ended really bad. So I'm
right.
assuming your parents went on like a witness protection or something like that. They had to get out of the country because it was unsafe, or I don't know exactly what happened, but like they had to move, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we moved not because of witness protection, but we moved because my dad was a fugitive. So my dad was
Mm,
running from the law, and that's the reason
mm,
why, which I didn't know this at the time, right? Like I had no idea what my dad did.
mm-hmm,
I just, in my home, I saw a loving, present father that was with me. I got home from school and he was there. And it was like,
mm-hmm,
let's go to karate practice and let's go do sports. And that's what I saw. I didn't know this other side of my father. I had no idea who
mm,
that man was, nor did I have the idea that we were living in a third world country in Venezuela because my
yeah.
father was escaping the law here in the United States. I had no
Mm-hmm.
clue of that.
And another thing that I see, like the extremes in your life, is that here you live in country that doesn't have all the excess of everything, and you say living in poverty and you don't see any difference. And then you guys move back, and at some point your father starts doing similar activities, and you guys start being extremely wealthy. Which, when you mentioned the the access of everything, like that's when it made me think of the movies that I've seen. Because tell me a little bit about that, because you're going from this one extreme to another, and like
Yeah,
how does a
yeah.
little kid find himself in all of this?
Yeah, so to me in Venezuela, life seemed like normal, right? I
Hmm.
saw wealth, but we lived in a whatever the best neighborhood was there, went to the best school. So we were doing good, right? But it wasn't flaunt in front of me. It didn't seem
Mm-hmm.
obscene, right? When we moved back to the United States, 91, 92, early 90s, those years in the early 90s, it was like the only thing I could think of is to me growing up, the cartoon and the movies of Richie Rich. If you could think of that was the type of wealth that was just like thrown in my face. And it was like lavish vacations, whatever you wanted to go, whether it was dinner, whether it was vacations. This one needed a house. Let's buy them a house. So my so and so needs to go to school. Let's here send them to school. This one needed whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It was there, and it wasn't just money for us. It was like money for everybody, family, friends, whoever. Like it was just an excess amount of giving financially, and I had never seen that. Even though my mom like really tried to humbly play it down and be like, "Oh, we're not rich. Oh, your dad has to work very hard. Oh, we don't.
Mm-hmm.
No, you can't." Like, but when friends of mine will come home from school, it was like, "Oh, you're rich. Oh, you have a lady that cooks for you or that cleans for you, or oh, you're rich." My friends would tell me, and then I would remember going and ask my mom. I'm like, "Mom, are we rich?" And she's like, "No, no." And it's, but I want to go. Why can't I go buy this? And she's like, "You cannot go buy it." So my mom, I feel like always was the one that tried to like keep us grounded in that sense. And I think to an extent she kept my dad grounded because I think that if my father didn't have her in his life, I think he
Yeah.
would have spent way more than the way that he did spend.
Yeah. And I think that's your saving grace, because when I met you, you don't come across to me like entitled kid. Like sometimes you meet these kids, they've grew up in wealth. And we're talking wealth. I don't know if you want to throw the numbers, but it's not $1 million. It's way more than
No,
that.
no, no. So at the time, and I could just get into it now, my dad went to prison. I was 13 years old. So at the time that he went to prison, I heard later on that that one year, him and my cousin had generated over $100 million that year. And he
One
went to,
year. Yeah.
and really half a year because he went to prison. I think it was June of '96, if I'm not mistaken, June, July. So like in that half a year, they had made $100 million. So it was they were making a lot of money, an obscene amount of money.
Obscene. It's a wealth that most people can't even imagine. And that's not over accumulated over a lifetime. This is in 1 year. So that's why
Right,
I'm thinking when I met you, I didn't get that vibe from you. I didn't get a vibe of a spoiled kid that drives his first G Wagon. Well, there were no G Wagons then, but whatever the equivalent is at 16, like you didn't do that. That's not who you were. And I think your mom kept you grounded, and that's your saving grace. That heart in you was always there, and that humbleness and those qualities were developed through your mom's approach to wealth, because some
right,
parents let the kids get lost in it, and I've seen so many examples where it doesn't turn out really good. And because you were grounded, you were able to go through your life. When we get into like things that did happen, it wasn't always, you were not always surrounded by this wealth later in your life, but you were able to
right,
cope. And I think it's
right.
because you that humbleness that your mom instilled in you.
Yes, yes, definitely. My mom was definitely the one to keep us all grounded, right? Me, my
Hmm.
sister, my father. She was the one that kept us grounded, that kept us humble. Yeah, she was that was definitely her. You depicted her and painted the picture perfectly. That's her.
Yeah, I can just sense it. Like I'm always love seeing human behaviors and how one thing leads to another. And your life is just a story that I love, like analyzing. Oh, so when this happened, this potentially was what he told himself. And I always try to feel like, what did your mom think? What did your dad think? All of that kind of stuff. It's
I'll,
fascinating.
I'll share,
Yeah.
since we're on my mom, I'll share something. I'm laughing right now at it. I must have been, I don't know, elementary, fifth grade, maybe. I don't remember exactly, but I remember my father had gotten, maybe it was it a Testarossa, a Ferrari, right? He had it for one day. Picked me up in school. I thought I was oh my God, that was my favorite car. I was head
Yeah.
over heels for, I was like, yeah, the coolest kid in school. My dad picked me up on a Ferrari.
Yeah.
That same day, my mother, I'll never forget this. My mother she would call my dad honey. She would say honey in Spanish. She's honey, like saying honey, but in Spanish she would say honey. And she's honey, go and return the car right now. The car cannot stay in our house right now. Today, that night, that car didn't sleep in our house. The next morning I woke up, there was no Ferrari in my driveway.
Wow. Wow. So
So
I
that
mean,
was
there's
her.
probably multiple reasons. It's number one is like she didn't want everybody to see the wealth because then they're
Right.
going to be a target. But number two, I think she was just trying to keep you guys normal, like a normal family.
Yeah.
And of course, the little
Yeah.
kid wants a Ferrari to pick him up from
Yeah.
school. That's the coolest thing ever. But she's watching it from a different perspective. Like, I want my boys to be, or not boys,
Right.
a boy and a girl, to be well adjusted to a world they live in and not just
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
driving Ferraris at 16. No, I love that. And tell us like how it all turns, because so you're living this lifestyle and it's all good and everything is pretty good. You have great family, you have a lot of love and support from your mom and dad. They seem like a good, great parents that gave you that foundation of love. Thank
Yes.
God, because
Yes.
everything else
Yes.
just gets really
Yeah. So
challenging.
at 13 years old, that was, let's call it my second time, right? That I experienced trauma. And that was my father going to jail. He went to prison. And I remember at the beginning, my mother tried to lie, tell me, oh, no, it's taxes. Don't worry. He's getting out. We go
Mhm.
to bond hearings and he doesn't get out. And we go to another one and he doesn't get out. And finally, at some point, it was like we make it up to a prison and I'm able to have a conversation with my father. And this is a behind the glass because he still hadn't even been like convicted, sentenced, all that. He's still like in a local type of prison. And you pick up a phone, you're behind a glass, and he looks at me in the eyes, crying, and just looks at me and said, "Buddy,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I made choices that are gonna put me away for a while, and I'm sorry, and I need you now to be the man in the house because I'm not gonna be home."
Wow.
And yeah, that was the first time that I began to question and ask why and what's going on and what are the choices. And he, during this time, sits with me and tells me, like, this is where I came from and these were the choices I made. And I'm sorry that I made these choices and I'm sorry that you're hurt right now. But during those teenage years, I was angry. I was very angry. The man that was my hero, was the one that
Mm.
built up my confidence, was the one that helped me become a champion in Taekwondo before I was ever a champion. He's the one that helped me see myself in the future, helped me commit to a sport, to have the discipline, the consistency, the work ethic to persevere through all the challenges that I had in that sport. And 5, 6 years down the road is when I start winning. And it was all because of my dad. Like my dad built my confidence up so much. And what he would preach was discipline, was perseverance, was
Hmm.
commitment, was being honorable, was being loving, being kind, being respectful, being a gentleman. Like all these values and these words that he would tell me every day. And then I look at him and it's, you're a fraud. Everything you've
Mm.
been telling me, like it's two sides to a coin, right? And I felt like that for, I want to say my early teenage years. I was angry. And yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
have my father home. My mother was literally every weekend traveling across the country in whatever prison he was in. And I would go from time to time, at least minimum once a month. But the other times that my mother wasn't home, me and my sister were being raised with our living maid that came with us from South America. And like 14, 15
Hmm.
years old, I started rebelling big time and I started hanging out with the
Yeah.
wrong crowd. I quit martial arts. My grades started going down in school and I started recreationally abusing drugs and fell into that trap and wanted to just numb my pain. So I went down that hole for, I would say, most of my teenage years.
Yeah. No, I can totally see how that would make you feel because you did have a loving family. Like if you did have parents that were like doing their thing, but you're raising yourself because sometimes that happens too. I don't think the pain would be as severe versus like you probably didn't know what's going on and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, so we had this beautiful life and now it's crashing because it was built
Right,
on the wrong foundation. That's not
right.
what, you're teaching me all of those things, but you're not applying it in your own life. So do I even know you? Who is my dad?
Yeah,
So I can
right.
totally see that would crush you.
Yeah, that was a big struggle for me in my early teenage years. I just felt like everything of him was a lie.
Yeah.
So it was so hard for me to accept and to comprehend why it was this a lie and then why is there two sides to this man. And there was a part that felt how, why was I not in? Even if it's a lie, then why was I not in it? Did something about me? Was I not trustworthy? And like I
Mm.
internalized it and like
Mhm.
my young self made it about me. That's what children do. So yeah, it was definitely difficult. I think first time I started therapy, I was 14, 15 years old, did it for a little bit. Then the therapist was like, I told my mother, I can't deal with your kid. He's too angry. I can't help him. He's,
Wow, it's
I
even hard
can't.
to
So
imagine because when I see you, I don't know that part of you at all. When we
yeah,
talk,
yeah,
I don't see that kid. So it feels like that part has been healed. That's a lot of baggage for a young boy, young man to already have experience in life. But I think your saving grace, just like looking from a perspective of observer, is that love that was instilled in your household. If you didn't have that father who teaches you commitment, mom who loves and protects you, who doesn't want you to become spoiled and ungrateful, and you still had all the values, that is what pulled you through. So even though your dad is not perfect and he made bad choices, which we all have that second part of us, he just chose
right.
to feed that wolf a little bit more in his life, but he was still a good man and helped you through build your character. And that is, I think, the foundation that helped you through your entire life after the story gets really bad. So it's still
Yeah,
your parents
a
still
hundred
instilled a
percent.
lot of good things in you.
Yes, yes, 100%. If I didn't have that foundation, that love, like you just said, God knows where I would have been. I could have turned out to be a completely different human being, right? It just I could
Totally
have
different.
ended up in prison or dead myself or a drug addict, right? It could
Yeah.
have gone so many different ways.
I think that's the differentiator, I think. You can go through anything in life. The childhood doesn't have to be perfect, but if you feel loved by people and you still have this sense of belonging and all of that, and your parents instill values in you, you can make it through. You may have challenges like, yes, you got into drugs during your teenage years, which are always crazy anyways. Even if you had a
Right.
perfect family, people get into drugs because teenage years are just challenging. It's self-discovery, it's so much. But I think that it could have ended really bad. You could have been dead or go the same path as
Yeah.
your dad or a variety of different things, but you had a character that was already built and then you were able to make it through it. But this is not even where it was really bad. It gets way worse. Right? So tell us about that part because that part is the most traumatizing, I think, and that's when life really took turn for
Yeah.
you.
So it's my senior year of high school. December, I want to say December 22nd, maybe, if I'm correct. I think it was 2 days before
Christmas.
uh Christmas. My father gets out of prison. And it was like something completely unexpected. I knew that they were doing things and appeals and whatnot and trying. He had a team of attorneys working to get him out, but just happened and he gets out of
Mhm.
prison. And it was that day. I remember waiting. It was raining in Miami night. He shows up in a car. I forgot who was driving. I think it was my aunt that brought him to the house. And it was late at night, at 12 midnight, 1 in the morning. It's raining and we're in the rain and we hug him and it's my life is complete. My father's back. So like this sense of love, peace, of joy, of everything bad that I was going through, I could drop it, right? I have my heart is complete again, is what I felt at that moment.
Yeah.
I remember us having a big New Year's party, family, friends, everybody at our house. And then you fast forward till May 3rd, 2001.
I know
So,
this is tough.
yeah, May 3rd, 2001, first time in my high school years, that night, or May 2nd, actually, I decided to sleep at my girlfriend's house from high school. So I slept at my girlfriend's house, and my sister somehow slept at her boyfriend's house. I'm not even sure how that happened, but we both slept outside of our home. And I go to school. I remember that day there was like a big Powerball or lottery, whatever, something, I don't know, a couple $100 million, something big. So I remember texting my mom in the morning and saying, "Hey, did we hit the Mega Millions or Powerball, whatever it was?" Like, question mark. And she didn't respond to me. And I'm like, huh, my mom's not responding to me. I'm like, that's weird. I didn't say anything. I didn't think anything of it. I go to school and I'm in my first period art class. I'll never forget this. I get a phone call from my sister. I'm like, first ring I just picked up. I'm like, hello? She's, you need to come home now. And I just heard it in her voice. I hung up. My teacher looks at me like, hey, you can't be on your phone. And I just ran out of his class. And I remember him opening the door and screaming, Richie! I just kept running, ran to my car, jumped in my car, and hauled that home as fast as I could. Yeah, and when I get to my house, what I see is my maid, my aunt, my dad's cousin, my sister, and everybody's crying, and I'm like, "What happened? What happened?" And Luani looks at me and goes, "They took him," and I'm like, "What? They took mom and dad?" Yeah, May 3rd, 2001. My mother and father were kidnapped. That was 23 years ago. No bodies were ever found. That day was chaotic. That day, I remember getting phone calls. My mom, I remember speaking to my mom one time saying, "Don't call the police. Your father's handling this. Don't call the police." I remember telling the adults in the room, "I know where they're going. I know the house that they're going. Let's go sit there and wait for them. Let's call the police. Have them wait for them." Everybody was like, "No, your dad's handling it. Your dad's handling it." I remember my dad hearing his voice one time and him telling one of his friends that was at the house, telling him, "Hey, you need to give two safes." And the way that he sounded just didn't sound like his voice. It sounded pretty bad. If he was on drugs or something. And you fast forward throughout the day, I don't know, 12, 14 hours later, they show up, the kidnappers, to the house with my mom. And my mom tells them, break down walls, break down this kitchen, break down. And she gave the two safes that my dad said to give. And she gave another 4 or 5 safes that were all hidden between walls. And then they told her, "You can stay and we'll let you know when we release your husband." And my mother at that time made a choice. And she told the kidnappers, "Hey," he said, "you promised me that you would release me next to my husband. So you take me next to my husband and you release us together. And if you're going to kill us, then you kill us together." And that's the story that I heard when I was 19 years old. And since that day of hearing that story of my mother, I carried this feeling of unworthy, of not enough, of like, why did she choose my father over me? Yeah. So that was something that years later I was able to let go of that story and reframe it and see that my mom made a split second decision and she was trying to save her husband, trying to save me and my sister from a very bad situation. And she did the best she could. And ultimately it ended up costing her life and my father's life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very tragic. And thank you for sharing that because I know it has to be just so difficult to relive that even and think about it. But I think it's such a powerful story that it can help so many people, like to know what is possible to overcome. Because this story is so powerful. And I really want to make sure you guys hear every detail of the story. I'm going to end the podcast right now, and we're going to call it part 1. And we're going to come back with part 2, where you can finish and hear the rest of the story. And it is amazing. So please stay tuned. Thank you for listening to the Phoenix Podcast. We appreciate your support. We would not be here without you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider sharing it with your friends or family members who might benefit from it as well. And please don't forget to leave us a review. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.